Welcome to another episode of The Messy Middle. I'm Laura Cook, your host, and today I am welcoming Kris McRea to the show. Kris McRea is the owner of McRea Consulting and Coaching, serving the mission to build and support more wholehearted nonprofits, small businesses, workplaces, and communities. Kris is a consultant, facilitator, and leadership coach with decades of corporate executive, entrepreneur, and nonprofit leaders. She holds a BA from the University of Puget Sound in Communications, Politics, and Government. Kris is a certified Dare to Lead facilitator and a Courage Catalyst with the Dare to Lead program and was trained by Brené Brown. She facilitates the Puget Sound Consultants Coffee, a community of local consultants that are in service of nonprofits. She is a proud board member of the Shoreline Schools Foundation and the Wellspring Ensemble, and she's native Seattleite. Welcome, Kris, to the Messy Middle. Thank you for joining me here today.
Thank you. It's very fun to be here.
So we're going to dive into our first question here. So you've worked with tons of nonprofit organizations in the past. Can you tell me how courage comes into play when we think about the nonprofit sector?
Oh, that's such a great question. And my world in supporting nonprofits is really based in the foundation of community-supported fundraising. So kind of everything that I lean on is how do we grow our community and how do we make systemic change in partnership with funders and donors and volunteers and board members and community members. And honestly, that's 1,000,000% all about relationships. So relationships are messy and relationships are challenging. But after my time with so many different organizations in my world, I am really finding some common themes that come up daily. And there's just so much great impact happening in the nonprofit world, but it's done in a place of scarcity, then that it's done in such a, those are kind of doing the great work are unfortunately also working in a kind of martyr-based culture from the, way back from even when charity was created, in a sense of just a very much of a colonizing perspective and a kind of a puritanical perspective. So that really trying to shift our world, that we need to be in a place of enough and a wholehearted, supported, and team-based culture is, I think, one of the biggest sticky places that nonprofits really, really work with. It's an interesting journey of being with those that want to work with something beyond a price of a product or something. And yet sometimes that ricochets back on us on how it engages in our own stories.
Yeah, that's a great point. And it leads right into my next question, which is, I've done a little bit of work with some nonprofit organizations, and when we did some self-compassion assessments, their scores were lower than average. So do you have any theories about why that might be?
Oh, so much. Nonprofits are tough work. It's tough work, and it is not for the faint of heart. And we, one of the reasons why I was attracted to the nonprofit sector is to do something beyond, product or price, and affecting an impact of a food bank or domestic violence or something as huge as climate change means that our reach is not finite. It's not like I'm meeting my KPI goals or I'm at a percentage of productivity. And then you add in all those extra inequitable structures. It really kicks those that are working in this work really hard at a heart place, at a value place, at a status place, and as where does they meet in this world. And interestingly, there's been some reports that have gone out on this as well. There's a really significant Pinnacle report that came out called Underdeveloped that was authored by Compass Point and the Evelyn and Walter Haas Fund. I think it was back in 2013. And it still totally rings through that many nonprofits are stuck in a vicious cycle that just threatens their ability to be able to get the resources that they need to succeed. And then that really hits staff in such a way that, and more than ever now, nonprofit professionals are leaving their roles for different ones or completely fleeing the sector. And they're in a place where, talent is not valued because we need to, be in a place of scarcity versus enough. trying to always reach for the next fundraising goal or impact. And it's a tough universe. So I'm grateful to walk alongside organizations and leaders to look at how differently they can be in creating a culture in which we can have brave work, we can have tough conversations, we can look at our budgets and say, what am I funding for possibility rather than how can I get the littlest out of it and squeeze the littlest out of everything? And just this whole concept of hustling for your worth is just not necessary or rewarded. That really is what I think kicks self-compassion to the curb in just some of the biggest way.
Yeah, it sounds like a tough place to be in. And I love that you're working with organizations to kind of turn that story around and change the paradigm. In terms of developing leadership, where do you think nonprofits need to do the most work, or how do you think nonprofits can work to develop their leadership?
I think when you ask that question, I think of two things, two big kind of operationalizing sort of things. One is boundaries, and the other one is perfectionism. And I'd say boundaries because it just loops right back to self-compassion, as you asked, and compassion for each other. That in this pandemic, it's made it so much more worse in so many ways. Zoom back-to-back phone calls. We have no chance for a bathroom run or even to process what just happened in a meeting is just one example. And how we can create and be purposeful about saying no and saying enough, or helping to support our own world to be able to be more present. And I think the pandemic has taught us that we just need to slow the heck down. Um,
Yeah,
the other part, perfectionism, there's such a huge difference between perfectionism versus striving for excellence. And,
right.
perfectionism is such a killer for collaboration, creativity, the not enough culture, once again. And especially in the nonprofit sector, it's so fraught with that perspective. So, healthy striving can really look like, quote, I need to complete this project to 60% and then check in with my teammates and manager for feedback and input versus I have to get this done and check everything and check everything and check everything. And then if it comes back with negative feedback, then like I'm lost in my worth. So
Mhm.
really thinking operationally, what can it look like to dance with boundaries and dance with healthy striving? I think
Mhm.
are kind of two pillars that can be a good start for a support.
Yeah, that sounds great. And in terms of that good enough concept, I can see that coming into play again instead of things being so perfect and identity tied to the product or the deliverable. Being willing to say, like you said, this is at 60%. Let's make it better together.
Oh yeah, and it's so interesting. I think there's a sense of, to kind of throw in therapist language here, there's a bit of disassociation when it's just about a thing,
Mhm.
but when it's about something that is about our human nature, our society, and when our nonprofit leaders are so tied to that, even just being on the front lines, just the squeezing of the heart, can in lots of ways, well-intentioned perfectionism in some ways is just even more eroding of that sense of self-compassion for sure.
Yeah, makes sense. Thank you. What do you think is the biggest barrier for nonprofit leaders?
I'm going to sound a little bit on repeat, but it's kind of, I see it often. I think nonprofit leaders, especially those at the higher levels, executive directors and board members, I think holding space for a culture of enough is going to be the hardest and is one of the hardest things to do. There's
Hmm.
so much that is out of their control. And saying no to impact heart, as I was just saying, is just heart squeezing. And there can be such a pressure when other lives and care in our impact to do just, for you to just do one more thing. But those in decision-making capacities really have to take a step back and identify how is it that they themselves can learn to say, I can only do so much, and then look at their team and go, well, if I expect that of myself, then I need to expect that of others. So how can I be the one who holds the tide or has those vulnerable conversations with board members or funders or budget conversations so that those leaders can demonstrate back to their team, I believe in you and I believe in enough, and I want to support you in that. So that also comes with, transparent conversations with funders around what enough looks like and how can they be supportive, not in the sense of like, just give us more money, but more of, can there be less reporting? Can there be more partnership rather than transactional funding? So it's complicated as heck, but this concept and this culture of enough seems unattainable and yet can happen in baby moments for sure, I think.
Absolutely. And I think sometimes too, just holding the context for purpose and the why and being super clear on that too might help with setting those boundaries and modeling the behaviors of good enough too.
Oh, so true. I'm a humongous follower of Simon Sinek and his culture of why, of start with why, and that often, especially nonprofit organizations, we keep doing the same old thing. It's always like, this is just what we do. And yet we've not really looked at the why that's connected to the how, that's connected to the what. When we can question more, it allows us to identify and diagnose what really is enough and what is really what we're doing purposeful and impactful. But asking that question takes a lot of courage.
Yeah, for sure. It does. Thank you. What do you think nonprofit leaders can do to promote a culture of caring and courage?
Oh boy. I think nonprofit leaders are in a place where what they do is what they can model. So it can become contagious. So I think, self-awareness 1,000,000% matters. It's a complex and challenging journey, I think, but I think it begins with building trust and kind of one small little moment with your team and your community. Brene Brown talks about trust as a marble jar and that when trust is given, it happens in small moments. And I so very often see in board meetings, a board president saying, you've got to trust me, where everybody is like, no, not happening. It just takes a lot of volumes of marbles out of that marble jar to kind of gain back trust. And unfortunately, the nonprofit sector, being in that not enough world, our marble jar is very, very shallow. So I think operationalizing of offering moments of gratitude for little things, celebrating when a milestone has happened, empathy and listening to our clients, our donors, our employees in a place of curiosity rather than outcome. Showing some vulnerability with our funding partners because maybe a program didn't get the results we needed, but yet we still need that partnership and we have a common hope. So, involving the team in that conversation, sharing with your team that you're really concerned about this new return to work policy because you have childcare to deal with as a, nonprofit leader, being vulnerable about your own struggles with what is coming is a great opportunity to demonstrate that we're all kind of in the same place together and that we can have some common weaving. So it just really shifts our paradigms that we're just all humans first.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Is there anything else you'd like to add in terms of leading in a nonprofit, in the nonprofit sector, or any other advice for leaders?
I think the big thing that I love, but it's hard and it's annoying and it just it's just a daily practice. It is literally just every day like, oh, this is another hard conversation. I really don't want this. I'm finding those that I've worked with for a while or that have been trying to embrace more of a daring culture in nonprofits, they actually find as they begin to start having some self-evaluation and some awareness and model new ways, actually gets harder before it gets better. But that means that the real work is happening. So I think there's hope, but it's going to take a while for us to begin to shift our culture into a place of enough. And it's going to take a lot of courageous people to do it.
Yeah, it's certainly not a box you can tick. It's going to be more glacial in speed, right?
Oh, that's a good one. I like that. That's very true.
Hopefully not that slow, but yes.
Yeah,
So if you're okay, I'd like to go into our 3 questions that I ask all of my guests when they appear.
sure.
Yeah. So the first one is, what do you think is the most important thing for leaders to know or do right now?
Hmm. I think the biggest thing is to look inward. And, I'm a big believer that we are how we lead, and how we are aware of our own emotions, what's happening in our world, and how it affects others is, I think, the biggest, powerfulest, humblest moment. And just how we might be offloading our challenges onto others, or how we might be contributing or corroding the culture of our team. So having inward time and being aware of just how we are as ourselves, I think, is one of the biggest things.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think sometimes as leaders we underestimate our influence, and because we know we're just people, but when you enter a room, what you carry in with you can really set the tone for everybody else if you're
Yeah.
not careful. So I
Mhm.
love that.
Mhm.
Yeah, good stuff.
Mhm.
Okay, so I also like to ask about self-care, which I think is important, especially when we talk about nonprofit organizations. So, what self-care practice are you currently embracing? What brings you
Oh,
balance?
honestly, self-care is a daily piece of work for me. I am my own practice, and I really have to work and invest in myself. And I'm often very not self-aware about what I need. But I have been in kind of a longer journey since January, kind of made a resolution, if you say that, of getting stronger in my body. And
Hmm.
that journey has been about how I work out so that my muscles fail and I get stronger, rather than I'm getting better. So
Hmm.
it's not only working on me in my strength, but really working at my stories in my head of what I've been kind of programmed in society of, like, if you're a certain size or a certain way, then you must be better. So I'm really doing some reprogramming. It's hard, but lots of stories that I have to work on daily. And I'm definitely seeing that I'm getting stronger, but I'm also getting mentally kinder to myself.
Nice. Yeah, it's nice to hear about the two things going hand in hand, which I think is so important. Good stuff.
Hmm. Yeah.
So finally, I find I have a long list of professional development or leadership books that I want to read, and I just haven't gotten to them all. So, what I like to ask about is what are you currently digging into, and if you can give us some key points or the Coles Note version of some main messaging, yeah, just to get us spark some interest.
Yeah. Well, it's been interesting. I have a bit of a personal development book addiction, and so I took myself off and didn't allow myself to order anymore for a bit, because I had many and I had read through some of them, and I tend to have 3 or 4 at the same time. So I have been I took myself off. I lost myself in some sci-fi and fantasy for the last month or 2, which is a nice break. But I just recently picked up The Gifts of Imperfection right now, as Brene Brown's Unlocking Us podcast is going through right now, with visiting the guidepost with her sisters. And I've read it about 3 times since it came out in 2010, but it's giving me a lot more insight and touchstones on how to practice a wholehearted life. So I'm in a different place today than I was each time. And it's like, oh, and it just hits differently. The other one I'm also digging into, it's packed with yumminess, is a book called Decolonizing Wealth by Edgar Villanueva. This book really connects with the work I do with just shifting colonial structures and nonprofits, and that the old boy networks, the savior complexes, the oppression that comes with charity work. So, and the thing that I like the best about it, not just these moments of like, oh yeah, okay, that's true, is that he brings a lot of indigenous wisdom
Hmm.
into the perspective that I just find deeply inspiring and just purposefully kind.
Nice.
So it's been lovely to take sections and chunks of that and digest it in a really purposeful way.
That's wonderful. Thanks for sharing that. Is there anything else that I didn't ask you about that you might like to talk about?
No, I think I'm just grateful for connecting with you and knowing you for the last couple of years and seeing all the great work that you're doing and being in partnership with this hard stuff around courage. So just grateful to be walking alongside with you.
Likewise. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Yeah, very fun.